What's up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 90, a regular YouTube video web series podcast thingy. My name's Meowth, and as usual, I'm joined by my two good friends and co-hosts, Roffle and Corbett. How are you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing all right. It's been a week one of a new expansion. Overall, really enjoying myself. Unless I queue into a couple of very specific decks, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later. But there's been a lot of new fun cards, and I've had a lot of fun, mostly playing with them when I've gotten to play with them.
Yeah, the first week of the playtest server has been a bit up and down, but hopefully once the expansion actually launches next week, I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can really do in Wild.
Yeah, it has been a week. I think, Rafa, you very aptly described it as it has been a week. There are two very specific decks that we're going to hop into to kind of start off the conversation that have been on the radar of the dev team. We've got some comments. We'll talk about everything, but it's kind of ruining the experience of many people's first week of Voyage to the Sunken City, and kind of ruining or hiding a lot of really, really sweet cards from the new expansion. And of course, we're talking specifically about Switcheroo Boar Priest, and we're talking about Kael'thas Druid. So Kael'thas Druid, it was a thing the week before the expansion dropped, but they got a couple new toys, and they're out here still killing people as early as turn 2, turn 3, by barnsing into a Kael'thas and then playing their entire deck and killing you with damage. And the other one being the Switcheroo Boar Priest, doing basically the same thing, turn 3, turn 4, killing you by swapping the boar stats with the darkness. So if you guys have played much Wild Ladder, you guys know about these decks, and yeah. So I guess the first little part of today's podcast will be a venting session / therapy session for all of you guys out there that have been hurt by these two combo decks.
I think, me personally, like, I vastly underestimated just how consistent both of these would be. Like, we've had Kael'thas before, and it was kind of a meme, right? Like, Kael'thas himself wasn't good for the game, but that all-in OTK deck wasn't really all that great. But now it has Aquatic Form, and various other, like, Capture Cold Tooth Mine is huge for that. Even Moonlit Guidance really helps you find your pieces a lot more quickly. So it just, like, it has what it needs to be pretty consistent at this point. So, I knew that deck was going to be obnoxious, but I didn't think it was going to be as reliable as it is right now. I've even been seeing Goku, like, playing a less, I don't want to call it a less all-in list, because he's basically playing Kazakhstan on turn 3 or 4 while emptying his deck, but less all-in on the damage. It just power cycles with draw and ramp, makes a big board because of Miracle Growth is now a card, which is very good for it. Not only does it draw, but it also makes a big boy, basically acting like a third and fourth copy of Ultimate Infestation, and then on top of that, you've got the 7-mana heal spell as well. So you've just got, like, all the draw in the world, and then you can play Kazakhstan early while threatening lethal with your board. And it's just, it's no matter what build of it, it's pretty gross. And then let's not even, speaking of Switcheroo, which again, I personally thought was going to be a meme, like, just because of the inherent failure rate with it. But things like Illuminate and Shadow Vision's Thrive really increase the consistency of getting to your Switcheroo before you draw the minions. So it's not a 50% failure rate, because you have a little bit of deck manipulation to prevent that, even if you don't draw the one of Sphere of Sapient. So it's really annoying. Both decks give me similar feelings to, like, Darkest Hour Warlock, where like, these decks don't really have a matchup spread, right? Like, it's just either they do their thing and they win, or they miss their draw and they fall flat on their face and you lose. Like, that's a really, really dumb way to play Hearthstone, where, like, neither player has much agency in the outcome of the game. And, like, that's the play patterns that have typically been immediately nerfed. So I think that's why a lot of people are expecting some sort of balance change in the near future, because, like, I'll be honest, it's not playing Hearthstone. Like that's not how the designers intend the game to be played, as is evident in some of the past balance changes that they made. So I think it's likely, and I'm hopeful that we'll get some changes to that in the future. Because honestly, I want to play other priest decks, and all of them involve switcheroo in some capacity. I just want to draw 2 minions. I don't care. Like, just let me play the card in other decks that are fair. And I'm hesitant to do that because I don't know how switcheroo is going to look long term.
Yeah, the switcheroo and Kael'thas conversation, it's like so many directions to take it in, right? Because like, do I just bitch for 10 minutes about how awful it is? Do I start digging into, the people that are saying that this is kind of fine, or like this isn't any different than other stuff that's happening in the format? Do we talk about, how likely nerfs are? Because here's the thing, like, nerfs and bans, I would be shocked if they weren't done at the first opportunity that they can. I 100% expect either bans or nerfs to happen to Kael'thas and Switcheroo. Like, I don't know what exactly they're going to do, because they still have to target Switcheroo for standard. There's kind of some degeneracy going on in there, involving some 3-mana Murlocs and Deathwing, and making some 12/12s with Rush on turn 3, turn 4. So, I don't know. My experience has been absolutely, well, I was gonna say abysmal, but it's been very much going through like the 5 stages of grief, where I was so pissed off that I tweeted out about it at the very start of the expansion. Like I was talking about how Kael'thas Druid was like the worst thing in Wild, and then I started to bargain. I started to play even Warlock with 28 tech cards. I cut Mountain Giant because I was like, dude, why am I going to play Mountain Giant on 3 if I'm dead on turn 4? It doesn't make any sense. So I cut down. I just ran pure tech, and that didn't work at all. I got really sad and moved over to standard, and now I'm just kind of fine with it. I'm just like, look, it's going to get nerfed. It's okay, but you know what? Let's do our therapy session. Let's do our complaining, because I know that everyone listening, well, not everyone, but the majority of people listening feel exactly the way we do.
Well, and that's part of the thing, though, is you can't. Both of these decks are popping off so quickly. Like, how can you tech against it? Because you still have to draw your tech cards, which, there are very few tech cards that reliably counter this, and many of them happen later than Switcheroo, later than a Barnes could come down. Like, yeah, Hucklebot is great, but what if they play Switcheroo on 3? And then it's like, you still just lose, right? Deathlord has to die. Dirty Rat, you need an answer to the 2020 boar, or the Kael'thas that comes out. So it's like, these things are like again, that's why neither player really has much agency over the outcome of the game, because yeah, there are cards that best case scenario can answer these decks, but they're going so quickly and drawing so reliably and have so many fetches for the pieces that they need that I don't think you realistically can tech against them, like, not reliably by any means. I mean, you mentioned the win rates, but it's also like 2 of the most popular decks at higher legends too, so they're queuing into each other a lot. So despite if you go to also the decks with the highest sampling of games on HS Replay, it's the same deck. So these people are queuing these same decks into each other repeatedly, and still they have very good win rates despite that. So it's like they are just kind of feeding on people bold enough to play other decks. And again, we talked about the speed of tech cards. Like, the speed of aggro isn't capable of keeping up with these decks either, because turn 3, if you turn 4, you're dead against both of these decks in a lot of cases.
Yeah, with the way that these decks are set up, it feels like there's not much tech that is good enough against it. There are not many decks that can kill them fast enough. So the matchup spread seems like there's very few bad matchups for the decks that we're talking about here. So what exactly are you supposed to do? Is there anything you can do?
Yeah, there might be some stuff out there. Like, I think that Secret Hunter is kind of one of the better bets right now, but it's very limited, right? Like, even a deck I was talking about the the bargaining and kind of the even Warlock adventure I went down, right? I just started shoving in every single tech card I could and things like that. And a lot of times this didn't matter, because it's like you do have to actually kill the opponent as well, if you're a deck like even Warlock, because you know, to actually put on some pressure. And also they it's the speed, right? Like you drop a Firewatch post and then they just like, I don't know, pounce Moonfire and they still pop off or something like that, right? It's just the or what happens if you just don't draw the watch post and they just go off on turn 3. Same thing with Switcheroo. Like I was playing an aggro rogue and I got hit with a 2020 boar on turn 2 from the opponent. I was like, oh, well, that was a game of Hearthstone. So yeah, when combat decks are this fast, they're not really easy to see tech against. A lot of times, players I've seen suggesting some very obscure choices, things like the shenanigans secret, I think, in Rogue, which is like the second card or minion that your opponent draws like turns into a banana or something. I can't even remember what the actual text is on that thing. Yeah, and it really does just like speak to, I think, a lot of why players can feel like these play patterns are okay, even though they're not. And I think it speaks to, problems and weaknesses that other people have in deck building. This is Hearthstone, right? It's a best of one, and you can't just like sub in your tech card when it's appropriate. And the thing is, you will lose overall win rate when you try and counter these decks with really obscure cards. You can't just throw in like a shenanigans or a sap or like I don't even know what, like whatever a like weird terrible card is. You can't just throw it into your deck just because it's good against this one thing, because it's so bad into everything else, right? Like you can't just float dead cards in an aggro deck or something. And like even a lot of these secrets and stuff that are designed to kind of beat the druid, something like pressure plate, right? Pressure plate doesn't even have the high success rate, because if they go like Barnes, then there's an extra minion on board. If they go like Barnes, it's like spell Barnes UI, there's like only a 1 in 3 that it hits the Kael'thas. But overall, it's just a very difficult thing to really go after. And it all together, because of the speed of the combo and how players don't have time to assemble disruption, it does create that matchup spread that Roffle was talking about, where it's completely flat, it's completely draw dependent. There's very little agency from either side, and it's just coin flip simulator. Like that's the truth. And it's an incredibly frustrating play experience, I think, for me. Like I described it as it's the type of meta where people pop up in a top 10 legend who have never been top 300 before. Like, look, that might be gatekeepy and elitist, but I mean, if the meta is just coin flipping and it's just draw dependence, I expect to see people at top legend that I haven't seen in the past, because it feels like decision making is pretty much just out the window. Like that's just the truth of how I feel.
Yeah, and like I think an important thing about the people suggesting tech cards too is they just kind of like throw these tech cards out as though like, yeah, that's an auto win against it. Somebody even like in my comments today said that Hecklebot is an auto win against Switcheroo, and it's just like that's just not true. That's not how it works. Their entire deck is built around drawing the switcheroo as early as possible, which means they are far more likely to hit the switcheroo. Even if they don't hit it on curve, they're still more likely to hit the switcheroo in the early game than you are to hit your Hecklebot, than you are to hit your shenanigans. Like, you're not building your whole deck around drawing shenanigans or Hecklebot like they are building their whole deck around finding the switcheroo so that they can combo quickly. Their whole play pattern is predicated around finding that switcheroo early in every matchup, regardless of what tech cards are happening. So it's far more likely that they hit their piece before you hit yours. And so, like, not only are you dropping win rate against every other deck because you're running these bad cards in your deck, but it doesn't even give you that 100% win rate against the deck. It doesn't, like, I would be surprised if it even gives you that much above 50% win rate against these decks, because like you can't reliably draw them on time. You can't reliably actually counter the decks. You just have the cards in your deck, and oftentimes they end up remaining in your deck while your opponent kills you.
Yeah, I had some incredibly frustrating experiences where I would rip the Demonic Project as early as turn 2, play another one on turn 3, just whiff, and then they would just top deck the Kael'thas on 4. And it was like, okay. I don't know what you want from me. That happened many times. And then, again, I kind of just moved on to Standard because I was like, I'm just not playing this anymore. That was my entire experience with it. Well, actually, that's a lie, because I have just been playing the Druid when I've been going over to Wild, like every other game, because that's part of the acceptance, right? I was talking about the stages of grief. That's where I'm at right now.
My acceptance is that as soon as I see someone play Switcheroo, or honestly, as soon as I see someone queue priest against me, I move on. As soon as I see a druid drop a Kael'thas, I'm out. Like the good news is that for me at least, I'm here creating content, so I'm going to record myself playing games of Hearthstone. Those aren't games of Hearthstone, so I just move on. Like with Pirate Warrior, it was uniquely infuriating because like it would string you along, giving you the illusion of a chance, and then bam, you're dead. This is just like, oh, sure, next game, I can I can move on. And so like I just happily move on because again, like I want to play Hearthstone, and this is something that maybe resembles Hearthstone from my perspective, from my side of the board, but like from the opponents, they are just playing Coinflip Simulator, which is what I really disliked about Darkest Hour Warlock, which is the last deck that infuriated me as much as Pirate Warrior does or did recently. And so yeah, like I just don't play against these decks because it's like it's not fun and not worth my time. And like fortunately I'm not pushing ranks, but like I feel for the people that are because they have to just
It's
kind of
insane.
suck it up and
Yeah, High Legend is crazy with the druid population right now. It's everyone's just abandoned ship and is just kind of like flocking to it and gave up on everything else.
Yeah, so I was just looking at HS Replay actually, and so this is a very limited sample size, but these are the two most popular decks, and they have extremely powerful win rates still, even with everybody trying to tech for it, building their decks with that in mind, queuing into a bunch of mirrors. They're all sitting at 55% win rate in Legend. Roffle, I don't know if things are much different at Diamond 5, but it seems like not only are these decks really popular and polarized, they're also just like winning a lot.
yeah, things are a little bit better at Diamond 5. I've been seeing a actually fairly good amount of variety. And in part because I'm not wasting time playing against these decks. So I see more decks. Unfortunately, like when I was trying to test decks that like I wanted to see if they're good, auto conceding to these makes it harder to see how successful they are, and it's kind of irritating. One more thing about the tech cards too, because like a lot of tech cards that people suggest are Hecklebot, Dirty Rat, Savory, Delight, even Demonic Project. Those have an inherent failure rate even if you do draw them on time, right? Because there's two minions in both of those decks, right? If you whiff on the Deviant Delight and you hit the Darkness, GG, you lost. If you Dirty Rat the Darkness, same thing, GG, you lost. If you Dirty Rat the board, you still have to have a second piece now to remove it. And then same applies to Demonic Project, where like there's a failure rate associated with that. With Hecklebot, yeah, it beats Priest, but then against Druid, you have the same thing. If it pulls out a Kael'thas on turn 4, you just did your opponent a favor. If it hits the Barns, they still have the Kael'thas. So it's like,
I know it's just the worst meta to me, where it's all about draw dependence from the Druid and Priest side, where it's just like you get to do a thing if you draw Barnes Kale, and then you don't get to do a thing. And same with if you draw Switcheroo, you get to do a thing. Otherwise, you just don't. There's no real decision making going on there. And then from the opponent side, like the quote unquote counters, just like promoting people trying to run tech cards, like drawing tech cards and playing tech cards and praying that your tech cards work is also completely uninteresting gameplay to me as well. Like it creates this like dynamic where no matter what you're doing, I'm bored and I'm not enjoying like what's happening.
yeah, just tank your MMR down just so that you're queuing into Diamond 5 people like myself, and you'll see a much greater
Lovely
variety.
place. Yeah.
Everybody's still playing Pirate Warrior and Questline Hunter where I'm at, and I would never thought I'd say this, but it's wonderful.
So I'm gonna kind of move on to a very simplistic question that's very loaded and probably a lot more complex in answers. But with the arrival of these two decks, would you argue that we need more disruption in the format?
I mean, sure. Like I'm not opposed to disruption as long as they're, I don't know, realistic and good. Like, but and not like ubiquitously powerful, like something. I feel like Mind Render or Lucy is a good example of bad disruption, and how disruption can go wrong. But yeah, like I like disruption cards. I would, and I think that they're a good answer. But like, I think these are two unique cases that like you can't disrupt your way past these decks. Is like what we've kind of just been talking about, right? If you can't smork down these decks, you're not going to disrupt them in time reliably. So I think that I don't know if that solves this problem necessarily, but like longer term, sure.
I think we're actually at a pretty good level of disruption in Wild right now. I know that people are sometimes always wanting more, but I think that like um, the fact that combo decks haven't really been able to exist if they're not rat proof for a while, I think is a nod to that. It feels like any sort of late gamey combo centric archetype has to have a certain somehow level of either redundancy or like something like Mechathan Warlock is kind of like one of the unique late game combo decks that has some ability to play around rat, but there really aren't that many of them. I think that like Shaman Success um, has the fact that Shaman is like even with a deck like Quest Rogue, for example, is kind of like pretty incredible considering it puts on like zero pressure. And I think there are just other decks though as well, like whether it's Weblord, like Weblord being a very strong counter to certain like Battlecry type decks. We're actually at a pretty good level, I think. Where apart from a few unique situations, it does feel like players have a lot of options, I think, with tech cards. It's just, again, it's not just, the availability of tech cards. It's a matter of drawing them and making them do something. So, yeah, it's just the speed of the decks, right? It's not like a lack of disruption. It's just that disruption is not quick enough to beat turn 2, turn 3 OTK. So,
yeah, I think one last thing that I wanted to touch on this topic that the Core brought up earlier that is very relevant is that like there is a deck that's similarly frustrating in standard to Switcheroo Priest, and so I think that gives me a little bit of hope that will probably be touched in a way that isn't just like a ban to Switcheroo, because I don't want to lose Switcheroo. Like I said earlier, I want to play Switcheroo, just not like in the Switcheroo Priest, right? Like I want to play that card in other fun decks, and I don't want to lose. Like a lot of people have been saying, just ban Switcheroo, and I'm like, no, give me that card. I want that card's interesting outside of this deck. Just don't let this deck. I would rather lose Stone Tusk Board than Switcheroo. I would rather lose the Darkness than Switcheroo right now. Like I don't know. Like so, I think it's likely that Switcheroo is going to get changed in some capacity so that it's not doing that, and I would expect that Kael'thas is too. But I think we're also like in a very unique situation where we have two of the decks that are doing the coin flippy thing. Like we've suffered through
Yeah.
one at a time in the past, and that was bad enough. Now we're really just watching two like flip coins against one another, and it's weird.
it is silly. Like, it is just a weird situation. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. To wrap up this conversation, I do want to say that it has kind of been all but confirmed that that changes are coming. So, for those of you guys that do not know, somebody named Matt London on Twitter. So Matt London is kind of now the guy on the development team for modes. So that includes Arena, Duels, and I believe Wild and Classic fall under his umbrella as well. And so, about a week ago, he did a thread about OTK decks in card games in general, and somebody quote tweeted that saying, "Oh, this is really interesting given what's going on in the format right now." And Matt London did reply, saying, "Yeah, it makes you really wonder about the near future." And so, kind of all but confirming that changes are coming soon. And so, just to put that out there. And so, assuming that that nerfs are coming this week, I mean, I have nothing to say that they're coming this week. That's the hopefulness in me. But let's say changes are coming soon. Are there other decks that are out there from Voyage to the Sunken City that you have messed around with in between games against the Coinflip decks that you think have a lot of potential, or you're excited to mess around with kind of in a post-patch world?
Shop bucket.
Do you wanna elaborate?
No. Murloc Warlock is actually pretty sweet. Like I out hand buffed a hand buff paladin, and it was uniquely satisfying. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's mana cheat and stat cheating that feels fair somehow, because you are paying life for it, and that can have consequences. Like, you don't really want to queue this deck into Questline Hunter because they remove your stuff and then kill you. But I don't know. There's something just satisfying about getting rewarded for being on ahead on board with Chum Bucket, being able to swing back the board with things like Lushwater Scout, and even my boy Crab Rider, who I was a little bit hesitant about, is feeling pretty good in that deck. And like the 5 mana Ravager Murloc is pretty nutty for filling your hand in preparation for the Chum Bucket or refilling your hand after you've dumped earlier. The Dredge mechanic feels really rewarding in that deck because you get unique payoffs for it, and you can then like plan your turns ahead. Ugh, man, the one thing that that those two decks are overshadowing is how sweet of a mechanic Dredge is, because they're kind of abusing it with things like Illuminate and Aquatic Form. But Dredge itself is just really fun. Like it allows you to prepare turns in advance, which is like what people always point to as the skill intensive Hearthstone gameplay is like planning your turns in advance. So that's what I'm looking forward to, just playing Hearthstone again, and Dredge is a big part of that. And Murloc Warlock is one of the most fun decks that I've played with this, with the intent of it being a successful deck. That and the aggro rogue is pretty nutty. I think that that swordfish really does some serious work. Whether or not you get a Buccaneer attached to it, and I think we're very lucky that Nitro Boost Poison was not unnerfed with that card. That would just be outrageous. Like that would be an extra 6 damage attached to that for 1 mana. There would be a 1 mana fireball. That's assuming there's no minions, or like your minion only gets to connect once. So that's 1 mana, deal 8. That's outrageous. No. So
Rogue is probably too good, to be honest. Like I think the Rogue deck is gonna be a little spooky once the nerfs to the Druid stuff happens. But I mean that's kind of the big one. Even right now, like Rogue might still be like the best choice on ladder, right? Like we're talking about like uncounterable and how it is difficult to sort of like beat out the Druid. Rogue still might like have the highest win rate just outright, so I wouldn't be shocked if that's the case right now. A lot of the other decks, like a lot of the tribal stuff doesn't interest me as much. Like I've never been super big into, like Murloc decks and things like that, or the mechs. So this being a very tribal expansion does kind of leave me a little bit limited on options. That said, I have very much enjoyed Dark Lair Priest. That is a deck that I didn't realize I was going to be playing for like 5 hours on day one, but there I was just playing for 5 hours, and I had a really, really, really good time playing some 8/8s on turn 3. It's like that Ratatouille meme where it just takes you back to your childhood. I had a great time. Thoughts?
No. For those of you guys that haven't seen Core, I think Core came out of his slumber and actually posted a YouTube video for the first time in like years.
Let's go. Yes.
Yeah, so you utilize the new 0-mana legendary to cheat a whole bunch of mana alongside stuff like Radiant Elemental. Who could have seen that one come in? And I think you had a couple games where you were like dropping 4 8/8s on turn 3 or turn 4, which was definitely some PTSD back to like OG Dark Lair, OG Quest Mage days. Like it was kind of gross.
Yeah, the priests didn't know what we were going to do with all these cards. It's just like, oh, this is a whole bunch of powerful stuff, and then it turns out 0-mana 8/8s. It's always 0-mana 8/8s every single time in a wild. But yeah, the priest stuff is pretty gross. Like it's pretty gross. Like I had a really good time playing it. It was fun. I wouldn't be shocked, Meowth, if you might get your wish sooner rather than later, I think.
Radiant Elemental nerf too? Oh, dude, if they do all 3 of those, it'll be Christmas.
I wouldn't be shocked. Well, maybe not like immediately,
I know.
but I think within the year I wouldn't be shocked if that happened, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean that's especially true if first of all it got moved to standard, right? So a nerf is possible in general, or more likely in general if something breaks in standard, but then like the fact that like Inner Fire is still very powerful even when Switcheroo gets nerfed. You've got the Dark Lair Priest, which honestly, like what you described is disgusting, but like it sounds fun to play. It sounds interesting. I want to try it, but like again, I'm just kind of waiting on the Switcheroo. So
Yeah, it was very difficult the deck to try and figure out like what to do. There's a lot of it took me a couple dozen, it took me over a dozen games I think until I started to feel kind of confident and stuff. But you can set up some nasty stuff like seancing the legendary. Like you can just keep looping and just like keep going infinite and stuff like that. So it's pretty nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I some of the mech decks as well in Wild kind of do some really gross things as early as turn 2, turn 3, thanks to Mech Warper, which is like Sork Apprentice and Radiant Elemental, except for mechs. And so I don't know. Maybe one day we'll get my wish, but I don't know. Those decks have to exist in a post patch world first before we can make any of those evaluations. I was actually excited. So when we were doing our card reviews, I kind of like glossed over Sunken Vessel like really quickly because Shuffle Rogue is kind of a complete meme. But the fact that it's like a shuffle card that actually gives you a lot of stuff on the front end as well was something that was super interesting to me. And I know it's something that like people in standard are kind of taking advantage of a little bit in their pirate rogues. So I mean, Shuffle Rogue's another deck that I'm interested in trying out like post patch. Trying to distinguish whether Mech Mage, Mech Paladin is good. There's just Demon Hunter in general. God, there's so much cool stuff, so many cool cards. I think that's like the saddest part about this like Coinflip simulator. Like if it came out of an expansion that like only had like 4 or 5 really cool cards that I wanted to mess around with, it wouldn't sting as bad. Like it would still suck, but the fact that all these cool cards exist and we can't really do anything with them yet is kind of the most depressing part about this meta.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It just like, I'm not even terribly partial to the like minion type decks myself, but I don't know. They both have kind of unique spins and mechs and murlocs that like I do find them interesting this time around, and like they actually printed some very cool mechs and murlocs that like I want to play. But yeah, it does feel bad when you can do those. I've been hearing a lot of reports of people having success with both Mech Mage and Mech Paladin though, so I think that you're right that those decks probably are the real deal, but it is kind of difficult to get a sense of that right now because everything is so, you know, dominated by those two decks that we were talking about earlier. So I think that if and when we do get balance changes, we'll kind of like Corb said, we'll actually get to see what the expansion brings other than those two decks. And I think that'll be a fun time for like honestly, like when I'm not queuing into those decks, I'm having some of the most fun in Hearthstone that I've had in a while. Like some of those decks that we were just talking about, like Murloc Warlock, um, even Pirate Warrior. I'm just like, I, I'm having fun just farming you, and that's not like, you know, that's not something that was happening prior to the expansion. The same is true for those mech decks. Like Pirate Warriors don't fear me anymore. I just I have new tools to beat them and like high quality cards and new archetypes that like can actually push them down that a lot of people are playing. So like you might start seeing the Pirate Warrior population decline even further because it's not going to be as successful anymore, and that's great news for me.
Yeah. All right. So basically, what I'm hearing is make sure you guys tune in next week for the real week one impressions of Voyage to the Sunken City because I'm
So,
given whenever the nerfs happen because I am assuming they're coming soon. I think the normal cadence has been like a week or 2 weeks after the expansion. They always do a balance patch for standard for outliers, and I would expect changes to wild decks in that balance patch. So I don't know if it'll be this week. I don't know if it'll be the week after, but I would expect them
Yeah,
relatively soon.
there's a Masters tour on not like this coming week, but the week after. So kind of like Thursday, like this next Thursday, or the Tuesday, are sort of the expected. Like Tuesday would make things very difficult for the Masters tour players, but you know what? That's never stopped them before. So we'll see. I think it'll be one of those dates, probably.
yeah, I'm torn on that because like on the one hand it's possible they pushed it back to avoid like these types of decks kind of ruining the Masters tour. On another one, because they pushed it back, they might be they might be hesitant to do balance changes before, and that might have been why they pushed it back to begin with, is to avoid like or to give the players time to prepare. And if you do balance changes, then they lose that prep time. So I don't know. Like you definitely no promises in terms of next week on the balance changes, but we're hopeful that there will be some soon. I gotta I gotta come in with the reality check and be the
Yeah.
bummer here,
Got
just so that people's
Look,
expectations don't get
they
set
they've gotta
unduly.
they've gotta fix Pandaren Importer. All right, that is the number one priority right now. So
Yeah.
I mean,
I am on that copium. I need these changes ASAP so that I can enjoy playing the format and the new cards. Like that's me selfishly hoping that it's this week, and I think it's a lot of people selfishly hoping for this week.
oh, I'm desperate for them this week. I like, yeah, no, I'm right there with you. But like, just because I want them doesn't mean it's going to happen, you know?
If you believe, they will happen. Right? And it's simple. Yeah. So like I said, check in next week, check in the week after for the real week one impressions of Voyage to the Sunken City once we get to play with the new cards. And so to wrap up today's podcast, we actually wanted to touch on a couple of things that were kind of announced / put out in the universe a couple weeks ago that we just didn't have time to talk about given all of the things going on with theory crafting and Voyage to the Sunken City being released and new cards and all that kind of stuff. So for those of you guys, we haven't talked about these in a while, but Iksar does bi-weekly Q&As over on Twitter. And there were a couple of really interesting tweets that they put out there hinting about a couple of things related to the WoW format that might be in the works or coming in the future. So just a reminder, make sure you guys are following Iksar. Make sure you guys are following the Matt London on Twitter, because the Matt London is going to be the guy that, you know, is going to be doing a lot of the wild tweeting and wild announcements as well. So make sure you guys keep an eye out on any. Make sure you turn on those notifications for you Twitter buffs so that you know when all those juicy tweets go live. But let's hop into a couple of these tweets here. It's been a while since we've done this, so I'm gonna do a little bit of reading for you guys. So Alonzo asked Iksar this question of, how do you feel about a rotating format in which only selected sets are legal? So this is a question that's been posed a couple of times. So kind of like the expedition format in Eternal. And then there was a bunch of stuff about Mercs that I won't read. So Iksar's reply was, we've been talking about shifting Classic to a format like this instead of just being Classic. There is real consideration here and not just a discussion. So it sounds like we might finally be getting what a lot of people have been asking for, where we get a rotating set constructed format.
very surprised. Very surprised that this is actually going ahead, because I know there's been sort of you know, they haven't really confirmed anything like that in the past. They've usually kind of like pushed back on the idea about wanting to split the player base, and as recently as like last year, we had I believe we asked Iksar about this when we had him on the show, and it's come up a number of times in the AMAs. So it's a thought. Like I thought like Classic was very much planned out to just be Classic, and then it'll be Nax, and then, you know, got GVG, and like it was going to be like this. But damn, it looks like there might have been some pretty rapid overhaul with their plans for that, which is really cool. Because I mean, you know, we've talked about in the past, like, I'd love this format. I'm super down for this format. It's been the thing. But I guess just wait and see if it's actually happening.
Yeah, and I think there's maybe a little bit less risk in splitting formats when you do this with an established mode like Classic, which unfortunately isn't nearly as popular as a lot of people kind of anticipated it would be. So like
It's
there
so
is
dead.
Yeah, I didn't want to say it because I'm sure there's some Classic enjoyers in the comments that would roast me, but like like people have that same perspective of Wild too. So I don't like you know, yeah, I know. The populations aren't nearly the same. And so I think that, like, quite honestly, Classic needs the help in terms of its population. And so doing something that is a little bit more interesting than chill when Yetis bopping each other is probably a good way to go about that. And I think would maybe, because I have concerns about splitting the player base as well. And I think that maybe doing that with an already established game mode is the way to go. And like, I had concerns about Classic splitting the player base, and that didn't happen. so so I guess I maybe my concerns were unfounded, and I'm just, you know, being needlessly I guess conservative in terms of the having different game modes in Hearthstone is probably just a good thing, especially a game mode that I think I would enjoy.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what they do here because God, I think it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, Matt put out this tweet where it's like, um,
What are your
what do you
favorite
want?
wild sets or
No, it was
expansions?
like,
Didn't you have
what do
one of
you
those?
want for like the WoW format, right? Like, if you
Oh,
could improve
okay.
one thing, and like one of my responses, like there was all these things about like balance changes and wild open and stuff like that, like the expected. But one of the things that I've like wanted the most is just like more ways to play with my wild cards because as we move on, cards like Reno and all these really sweet cards kind of get phased out because they just kind of get outclassed or the you know things are things are just going to change, and so just like more formats where I can play these cards is better, right? And it will incentivize people to buy more packs, right? So that they keep playing some new decks in these rotating formats. So the more things that are in Hearthstone, I think the better. And it doesn't really sound like it's going to take away too many resources if they're already using like what the shell of Classic is to make this new format. So I'm excited for it. We'll see if it actually happens and comes to fruition, but I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, and I think Matt did have that tweet that I was referencing where he was asking like, "Hey, what is your favorite like expansion of all time?" And
Yeah.
like he was talking about old stuff like that. So
Hey, so another
maybe.
reason you should be following Matt. He foreshadows a lot of these really interesting things on Twitter, apparently. um,
What one thing I will add to that though is that he's not on the balance team, so don't yell at him about balance issues. He is purely here for like these
Big
types
picture.
of bigger picture mode type things and the direction of some of these formats, like shifting Classic towards a rotating format, not fine tuning the cards that you play with on a daily basis. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you for that important disclaimer before we barrage Matt, and he never wants to talk to us ever again. So, yep. Next tweet, though. So there was a tweet. Has the idea of wild exclusive support cards ever been thrown around to breathe some new life into set-specific archetypes like Jade Rogue or OG Cthulhu? And so Iksar replied, elevator pitch time. We make a new set of cards made up of mostly old Hearthstone favorites, but also some new cards that go straight to wild to support archetypes that were fun, but were never quite powerful enough. This becomes the pack you want to buy if you want to play wild. Matt London and co. have been cooking up some ideas in this space, very early, but we like it as a starting concept. And this got the eye emojis, so you know it's something spicy and interesting. So, for those of you guys, I'm going to make a Magic reference here, so Corp, please don't hate me. But some of the Eternal formats in Magic, they have things like they have master sets, or they have like a Modern Horizons, which inject cards that would be way too powerful for Standard to breathe new life and into these Eternal formats. Most importantly, it gets people to buy cards, right? But they do introduce a lot of really powerful, interesting cards, in my opinion. Some of them way too powerful, but that's a different issue. So, would you guys be down / interested in seeing something like that for Wild?
Yes, absolutely. This is my favorite idea that they are potentially working on for the sake of the wild format. I've spoken a lot in the past about like the real need for wild is some incentive to play it over standard. Cards that are exclusive to the format are exactly not just cards, but new cards that are exclusive to the format are a really big incentive to get people to actually try out the format because otherwise you can't play those new cards and you get that feeling of being left out. And so I'm 100% on board with this. This is like if I could choose one of these things to happen tomorrow, it would be this thing because like this is the thing that I think is the best for the format more broadly. Like I think this would potentially have a bigger impact if they did it on a semi-regular cadence, even if only once a year, than even the Wild Open would, just because you're going to draw in more players that aren't super competitive, and that's the bulk of your player base. So like this, I think would be huge if they move forward with it, and I really hope that they do. I've been hoping that they did this for a very long time, but I didn't ever think it was even something that they would consider. So the fact that they're not only considering it, but potentially in the early stages of working on it is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Again, not something that I thought they would ever really have done. Maybe just like floated out there, like, oh, well, yeah, it's been talked about. But I mean, it kind of looks a little bit more than just we've talked about it. It kind of, that's eye emojis. Look, those are strong eye emojis. My one fear, I guess, is kind of what Meowth was talking about with the power level and sort of pushing the power creep even more, which is why, like, I think it's like a great idea. It just it would obviously require very delicate the very delicate balancing of like what exactly you're pushing and how you're pushing it. I think it's totally great if you're doing things like Jade Rogue, and especially if you're pushing archetypes that have traditionally been not just weak. Obviously, like weak is important, but slower. Like I think as long as you're not progressing the speed of the format too much, that would be ideal. Which is why I think like Jade Rogue is a really good example personally. But there's a lot of like dead archetypes in Wild that have just seen no support that you could easily revive in a number of exciting ways.
I think that point is true for any injection of new cards, though, right? Like,
Yeah,
so like you don't want to increase the speed of Wild in any new expansion either, which is kind of our complaint with the unnerfs and the new cards that we got. So yeah, as they need to toe that line between playable in the format, which has had some creep and power over the years, and format breaking, which is a really hard line to toe, to be honest, and why we've ended up with things like we see now.
yeah. I guess the difference is like a lot of the standard expansions when they come out, sometimes they can accidentally mesh with wildcards, which can provide like very broken interactions. But it's just a matter of if you're intentionally pushing certain archetypes like in a more targeted way, I feel like that is even more potentially risky in terms of like upping the power level. But yeah, again, like you're saying, all new cards potentially break things. We just had that with Switcheroo and Boar, so it is part of an inevitability of the of Wild that things get powerful.
Yeah. I mean, so don't get me wrong, I think new cards are always sweet, but I think there's some sort of beauty in like watching these cards that would be innocuous have these really unintended sweet interactions in the format, right? Like Beast Druid, if you wanted to push the set like 2 years ago, I think the Beast Druid support would be completely different than what we saw in standard, and it would have like I don't know. It feels super weird to me. Like that's part of for me the beauty of the format is just like
Happy
watching.
accident.
Yeah, happy accidents. These decks like
Yeah.
Beast Druid popping up, right? Dark Glare Priest popping up, Dark Glare Warlock popping up, right? Like these really sweet decks that are just built off of these sweet interactions. And I think I'm just really scared. Maybe I'm scared of what's happened in Magic, of like these sets have been extremely pushed and they have completely warped the format to be built around those cards,
Mm.
right? And I'm not saying that Hearthstone will repeat that mistake. It's just something that I'm extremely wary of like, then it becomes, all right, rather than a rotating format where people don't have to buy new cards to compete, what some of these Eternal formats have turned into is like, hey, you need to buy the new cards to compete because they're so much powerful than everything else. And it turns into kind of like an artificial meta rather than
And
like letting the meta kind of develop on its own.
right.
Yeah. So like I know Rolf was on. Said he was really excited about it. It is something that I am still like super hesitant on. I will say I trust the Hearthstone team a little bit more than I trust the Wizards development team, especially since we're a digital format and they can go in and like fix mistakes if they make any, which is like a huge deal. But I don't know. I'm super wary, but I would also like if they announce next week that they were coming out with one of these, I would still be super excited. That being said, we have one last tweet to talk about, and it's going to turn around and wrap up our therapy session here today, because it's related to the reverts here. So can you talk about the philosophy about the recent wild reverts? A lot of people from the community are wondering why they seem so quote light, especially when the team reverted what many considered a problematic card like Kael'thas. So Iksar replied, the philosophy is simple. Revert cards that would make Wild more fun. Don't revert cards that would make Wild less fun. That is obviously a subjective thought, but that is the goal. So, thoughts on that?
I'd just like to commend the original poster for asking this question so well. It's easy to say, to smash your hand on a keyboard and say, why unnerf Kael'thas? But it's like it poses the question in a respectable manner, and it's a legitimate question. Like, there were some nerfs that we were expecting. We talked about this in one of our last episodes. Like, there's some unnerfs that we were expecting that didn't happen, and then everybody's kind of like scratching their head when Kael'thas got unnerfed. So like it approaches a difficult question in a respectable manner. So I think that's a good start, and it's an important question too. But I think with the answer, it seems clear that like the majority of players, at least, seem to agree that Kael'thas is not making the format more fun. So hopefully they undo it.
Yes. Yeah, we'll see. The nerfs for what the reverts for whatever it's worth, I actually don't think they'll light, right? Like that was kind of the loaded into the question, but I don't think the reverts will light overall. I personally wouldn't have been, a huge fan of seeing things like Nitro and Gibbling back in, because I think that some of those cards are just too powerful, and Gibbling, it isn't an OTK on turn 3, but it can create very similar non-games. Like I didn't really want Crab Rider reverted either. And I think we saw quickly just how like fast Crab Rider could push something like in a Fire Priest. Like it was kind of crazy. And so for me, I actually don't think they were light. I just think that there are a few outliers, and Kael'thas is obviously one of those. Where it does seem very clear, like what I was talking about, where you take a step back and it actually makes a little bit of sense, where they're fine pushing these early game OTKs as long as they don't seem to think they're going to be too strong. Even if those OTKs like on turn 4 or 5. Obviously, Kael'thas better than that. Kael'thas too good. Kael'thas I expect to be re-nerfed, the reversion of the revert, and that should happen quickly. But yeah, I mean, the answer makes sense, right? Like Kael'thas is a fun card for a lot of people. I know a lot of people are enjoying it. There's a lot of defense going on for Kael'thas right now from some sectors of the playbase. So obviously some people are liking it. It's just a bit too much, I think. And I don't really blame the dev team at all for when they miss on this kind of stuff, because, like a lot of us thought Switcheroo Priest, for example, wasn't going to be good enough. Like it wasn't until the day before the expansion where I was talking to some people and I realized, I was like, oh, I think this is actually going to be better than I thought. Like it kind of like dawned on me finally, and then about 24 hours later, the reality set in. So, it's always a little easy in hindsight to start yelling at the devs and that kind of thing. But I think, again, Wild is such a high-powered format, and the failure rate on these decks can be so fine that it's just easy in hindsight to make it look like it was always obvious and always so clear what was going to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. And I've been seeing a lot of comments saying, well, they should just never unnerf anything again if this is like, because this failed. And it's like, we've had 2-3 years. This is one card where it went pretty horribly wrong. I don't feel like we should throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Like, just because this happened doesn't mean we should be rooting against nerfs in the future, because like that's a big shakeup for the Wild format. Especially last year, we had like the most cards changed with the core set. We got really fun and interesting cards back that had been unplayable for a very long time. So like that attitude kind of irritates me as well. So they got it wrong. Hopefully they recognize and adjust quickly to that. They've done so in the past with things like Pocket Galaxy going to 5. So hopefully they're able to, to correct. And like it's unfortunate for at least a portion of the player base. It's kind of like lost confidence in the idea of unnerfs, but I think broadly speaking, the unnerfs have been very good for the Wild format. This is just one example of them going wrong.
Yeah, very true. All right, that's gonna kind of wrap it up for today. We had some time to talk about some Q&As, and we had our therapy session. Hopefully everybody is feeling better. That's listening at least a little bit. Take solace in the fact that there are changes coming soon. TM. And so yeah.
Unconfirmed, but still.
Unconfirmed changes. Changes are coming. I would be very surprised if they didn't think that these were a problem, and decide to not take action. So yeah, hopefully everybody can find something that they're enjoying, whether it is a deck that's more fun, not really caring about your win rates when you queue into all of these decks, or you're taking refugee and or refugee status stuff in standard or arena or any of these other formats as well. So I appreciate everybody listening. Hopefully next week we come bearing better news, better decks, and a better recap of the week 1 meta. But you'll have to tune in next time to find out. Roffle and Corb, thank you again for joining me, and let the people know where they can find you and your standard and or wild content.
Yeah, you can find me smashing my head against the concede button every time I queue into Priest and Druid at twitch.tv/Roffle, or you can catch highlights of that with those portions edited out on YouTube at Roffle. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at RoffleHS.
And you can find me at Twitter at Corbettgames for the hottest takes and the spiciest memes. You can also find me at this Corbett on YouTube, and Corbett at twitch.tv. Sorry, I haven't quite gotten used to dropping the games from the Twitch shout out, but yeah, just Corbett on Twitch now.
Yep, you guys can find me at GetMeOut on all of those platforms that were mentioned. Appreciate all of you guys listening all the way to the end, and we will see you guys again next time. Later.